In a small, forgotten corner of a quiet town, there lived an old man named Mr. Harold Finch. His house was not large or beautiful, just a wooden cottage with peeling paint and a small porch, where the sun liked to rest in the evenings. But what made his home special was not the house itself. It was the sound of wings, hundreds of them. Every morning, the air around Mr. Finch's cottage would come alive with the fluttering of birds, sparrows, doves, robins, and even a few parrots that had somehow found their way there. The townspeople often joked that the birds loved Harold more than people ever could. And perhaps they were right. Harold had lived alone for many years. His wife had passed away decades ago, and he had no children. The birds were his only family now. Every day at sunrise, he would fill small bowls with seeds and water, talking softly to his feathered friends as if they could understand every word. "Good morning, my little ones," he would say with a smile. "You're up earlier than me again." The birds would chirp in response, a melody that filled the loneliness in his heart. The townsfolk found him strange but kind. Children often peeked through his gate, giggling as they watched him whistle tunes that the birds seemed to follow. But one child in particular, a boy named Eli, was fascinated by Harold. He wasn't like the other kids. He didn't laugh at the old man. He watched him with quiet admiration. Sometimes after school, Eli would stop by and sit on the steps outside the gate. Harold would wave him in, hand him a piece of bread, and teach him how to feed the birds without scaring them. Over time, a friendship blossomed, one that neither expected but both needed. "Why do you love them so much?" Eli asked one day. Harold smiled. "Because they never leave. People always go away, son. But birds, they always find their way back." Eli didn't understand it completely then, but something about the sadness in Harold's eyes stayed with him. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, hundreds of birds gathered on the rooftop. Their wings shimmered in the golden light, and for a brief moment, it looked like the house itself might lift off and fly away. Days turned into weeks, and Eli's visits became a part of Harold's life. Every afternoon when the school bell rang, the boy would run through the winding streets, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, until he reached the little wooden gate. Harold would already be there, sitting on his porch with a cup of tea, waiting. He always had a second cup ready, not for himself, but for Eli. "Careful, it's hot," Harold would say with a chuckle as the boy sat beside him. They would spend hours talking about the birds, the weather, or the strange shapes clouds made in the sky. Sometimes Harold would share stories from his youth, days of travel, adventure, and laughter that now felt like another lifetime. Eli listened with wide eyes. To him, Harold wasn't just an old man. He was a keeper of forgotten wisdom, someone who saw beauty in things others ignored. One afternoon, as they watched the sparrows playing in the bird bath, Harold said something Eli would never forget. "You see, Eli, these birds are free, truly free. They don't belong to anyone. I keep them here because they choose to come, not because I make them stay." Eli frowned a little. "But what if they leave and never come back?" Harold smiled gently. "Then I'll still be happy for them. Because love, my boy, isn't about keeping. It's about letting go and wishing them well." Eli didn't fully grasp the meaning of those words yet, but he nodded anyway, as if he did. The evening air turned soft and orange as the sun began to set. The birds returned from their day's flight, landing on the railings, the trees, and even Harold's shoulders. He laughed as a tiny robin perched on his hat. Eli laughed too, clapping his hands. It was one of those small, perfect moments, the kind that passes quietly but stays in the heart forever. As night crept in, Harold looked at the boy and said, "Promise me something, Eli." "What's that?" "If I'm ever gone one day, don't let these birds be trapped here. Let them be free. Promise me." Eli blinked, surprised. "You're not going anywhere, Mr. Finch," he said with a grin. Harold chuckled softly. "We all go somewhere eventually. Just promise me, all right?" Eli hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I promise." The old man smiled, a soft, tired smile that carried years of love, loss, and acceptance. And above them, a dove took off into the fading light, its wings glimmering like silver against the dusky sky. Winter arrived gently that year, like a soft sigh over the town. The trees shed their last golden leaves, the sky turned pale, and the mornings carried a chill that made even the birds quieter. Eli still came to visit Mr. Finch every afternoon, bundled up in a worn-out coat and a red woolen scarf his mother had knitted. When he'd arrive, Harold would be waiting on the porch, wrapped in an old blanket, his breath forming tiny clouds in the frosty air. The birds gathered too, fewer than before, but still enough to fill the air with faint fluttering. Harold's hands trembled a little more each day as he scattered seeds, yet his eyes still shone with warmth. Cold doesn't bother them much, he told Eli one day, his voice hoarse. They just keep moving, keep singing. That's how they survive, by not giving up. Eli looked up at the gray sky. I wish I could be like that, he murmured. Harold chuckled softly. You already are, boy. You've got more spirit than half the grown-ups in this town. They shared a quiet laugh before the wind carried it away. Inside the cottage, everything had a story. The old clock that ticked unevenly, the faded photographs on the wall, the wooden cages Harold had built long ago, now mostly open and empty. Eli liked exploring them, asking questions about each one. One afternoon, he pointed to a dusty painting. Above the fireplace, a picture of a young couple, surrounded by birds. Is that you and Mrs. Finch? He asked. Harold's eyes softened. Yes, that was taken the summer we built this house. She loved the birds as much as I do. What happened to her? Eli asked quietly. Harold smiled faintly. She flew away too soon. Eli didn't ask anything more. He could feel the weight of silence between them, deep and gentle. That evening, when the first snow began to fall, Harold stood outside, letting the flakes land on his hands. The birds fluttered around him, their feathers catching bits of white. Eli laughed as one tiny finch landed on his shoulder. Looks like it likes me, he said. Of course it does, Harold replied. They can sense kind hearts. For a while they just stood there, an old man, a young boy and a family of birds beneath a sky full of snow. Eli didn't know it then, but that winter would be the last one he'd share with Mr. Finch. By the time spring touched the town again, the world around Harold's little cottage began to bloom. But something inside the house had grown quieter. Eli noticed it first. The porch where Harold used to wait every afternoon now stood empty. The teacup still sat on the small wooden table, one with a faint ring of dried tea, as if left in a hurry. The birds still came, hundreds of them, circling and perching restlessly, calling out in soft, confused chirps. Eli's chest tightened as he ran to the door. He knocked once. No answer. He knocked again. Mr. Finch, he called. It's me, Eli. Still nothing. The door creaked open under his trembling hand. Inside, the air felt heavy. Dust motes floated lazily in the sunlight, streaming through the curtains. Everything looked the same, yet different, too still. The clock ticked faintly, and on the armchair by the window lay Harold's old blanket, folded neatly. Eli stepped forward, his heart pounding. On the small table beside the chair was a note, written in shaky handwriting. It read, My dear Eli, if you're reading this, I've gone where all wings eventually fly, into the sky. Remember your promise. Don't let them be caged. Let them be free. Harold Finch. Eli's eyes blurred with tears as he read the words over and over. He didn't want to believe it. He didn't want to think the man who had taught him kindness, patience, and love for the smallest creatures was gone. Outside, the birds began to gather again, louder this time, their chirping echoing through the quiet street. It was as if they knew. Eli stepped out, clutching the letter to his chest. The trees around the cottage seemed to sway mournfully in the wind. He stood by the bird cages, some open, some still closed, and remembered Harold's voice. Love isn't about keeping. It's about letting go. Eli's hands trembled as he unlatched the first cage, then another, and another. The birds hesitated for a moment, then burst out in a flurry of wings, robins, doves, finches, sparrows, all rising together into the clear blue sky. The sound was deafening, yet beautiful. Eli watched them soar higher and higher until they became tiny dots against the sun. For the first time in his young life, he truly understood what Harold had meant. Love was freedom. And as the last bird disappeared into the horizon, Eli whispered, Goodbye, Mr. Finch. Fly high. The days that followed were quiet, painfully quiet. Eli still came to the cottage every afternoon, though the porch was empty now. The townspeople had already moved on, whispering briefly about the kind old man who used to feed birds and then forgetting him just as quickly. But Eli couldn't forget. He swept the porch, watered the small garden, and filled the bowls with seeds and water, just like Harold had always done. The birds came back, some timidly at first, then in greater numbers, circling above before landing softly around the boy. He smiled faintly. Hey there, he whispered. You remember me, don't you? A small robin hopped closer, chirping as if to answer. Eli laughed, a sound that carried both joy and ache. Inside the cottage, nothing had changed. Harold's book still sat neatly on the shelf. His old hat still hung by the door. The letter Eli had found remained folded in his pocket, worn from being read over and over. That evening, Eli sat in the armchair by the window, the same one Harold used to sit in, and watch the sunset paint the sky in colors of gold and rose. The birds fluttered across it, their wings catching the light. He whispered to the empty room, "I kept my promise." In that moment, the world seemed to grow still, peaceful. The next morning, Eli brought his mother to the cottage. She looked around quietly, understanding everything without needing words. "He loved this place," she said softly. "He did," Eli replied. "But now it's mine to care for." And he meant it. From that day forward, Eli made it his mission to protect the birds, just as Harold had. He read every book the old man had owned about migration, bird songs, habitats, and the language of wings. He learned how to nurse injured birds, how to build safer nests, and how to recognize them by their calls. The townspeople began to notice. They'd see the boy, now older, standing at the gate, surrounded by birds of every color and sound. Some started calling him the bird boy. Others simply smiled as they passed, feeling the warmth that radiated from that little wooden house once more. Years later, people would tell their children about the kind old man who loved birds and the boy who never forgot him. And every morning, as the sun rose over the town, the sky above, Harold Finch's cottage filled again with the sound of fluttering wings, free, alive, eternal. Years drifted by like soft feathers in the wind. Eli grew taller, his voice deepened, and the small boy who once fed birds on an old man's porch slowly became a young man with a purpose. The cottage, once fading and forgotten, came alive again. He painted the walls a gentle shade of blue, Harold's favorite color, and fixed the broken shutters that creaked whenever the wind blew. He hung small wooden signs that read, "Feed them with love. Wings deserve freedom." Soon the townspeople began to visit again. Children would run through the gate just like Eli once did, carrying crumbs and seeds in their little hands. He would smile, showing them how to stand still, how to breathe slowly, and how to let the birds come to them instead of chasing them. One afternoon, a little girl named Lucy asked, "Why do you care so much about birds?" Eli smiled, the same soft, thoughtful smile Harold used to wear. "Because someone once taught me that love isn't about keeping something close. It's about letting it fly." Lucy blinked, trying to understand, then nodded seriously as if she did. Eli called the place the House of Wings. It wasn't just a home anymore. It became a sanctuary. Injured birds were brought there by farmers, travelers, and even school children. Eli cared for them gently, nursing them until they could fly again. He kept careful notes about each bird, what kind it was, how long it stayed, and the day it flew away. He started keeping a small journal, writing in it every night. "Today a dove healed. A sparrow left this morning. I hope it finds the old skies." The world feels full of Harold's voice again. As time went on, the sanctuary became known beyond the town. People came from nearby villages to see the man who spoke to birds. Newspapers wrote small stories about him, calling him the Keeper of Wings. But Eli never cared about the fame. He only cared that the birds were free, that the promise he made long ago still lived in every wingbeat. One evening, while sitting on the porch, he opened Harold's old letter once more. The ink had faded a little, but the words were as strong as ever. "Don't let them be trapped here. Let them be free." He folded it gently and looked up at the sky. The horizon glowed orange, and hundreds of birds rose into it, their silhouettes painting the air like living brushstrokes. Eli whispered, "You see, Harold? They're still flying." And in the hush that followed, he could almost swear he heard the old man's voice in the wind, laughing softly among the wings. The summer that year began beautifully. Bright skies, soft winds, and mornings full of birdsong. But by late July, the weather turned. Dark clouds began to gather, heavy and restless, rolling in from the mountains like an army of shadows. Eli stood on the porch one afternoon, looking up at the gray sky. The air smelled of rain and thunder. The birds sensed it too. They chirped nervously, fluttering from tree to tree, unsure whether to fly away or stay close to the safety of the cottage. "Easy now," Eli murmured, holding out a hand as a sparrow landed on his wrist. "It's just a storm. It'll pass." But the storm that came that night was unlike any he had seen before. The wind howled, slamming the shutters against the walls. Rain lashed the windows, and lightning split the sky open like a wound. Eli rushed outside, trying to cover the smaller cages and shelters he had built. Water poured down his face as he worked, shouting over the roar of thunder. "Go!" he yelled, waving at the birds. "Fly away, go to the trees." Some obeyed, taking off into the wind. But others were too scared, huddled under the eaves or clinging to branches that bent dangerously low. A powerful gust tore through the yard, snapping one of the small wooden shelters apart. Eli ran toward it, shielding a few tiny robins under his coat. His hands shook, his clothes soaked through. Then suddenly, a blinding flash. A nearby tree caught fire where lightning had struck it. The heat and smoke filled the air instantly. Eli stumbled back, coughing, clutching the small birds close to his chest. He dashed into the cottage, shutting the door behind him. The birds fluttered around wildly, frightened but alive. He placed them in a basket lined with cloth and sat by the window, watching the storm rage on. Outside, branches snapped. The wind screamed. Inside, Eli whispered prayers to the sound of thunder. "Please," he murmured, "just let them make it through the night." When morning came, the world was quiet again, eerily quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind broken trees, scattered nests, and puddles that reflected a gray, heavy sky. Eli stepped outside slowly. His heart ached at the sight. So many shelters destroyed, feathers scattered everywhere. But then, in the distance, he heard it, a single chirp, then another, and another. He turned toward the sound and saw them, the birds, tired but alive, returning one by one to the cottage. Eli dropped to his knees, tears mixing with the rainwater on his face. "You made it," he whispered, smiling through the ache. "You really made it." That day, he rebuilt everything from the ground up. Stronger shelters, deeper foundations, wider perches, and above the doorway, he carved a new sign, one Harold would have loved. "The wings may fall, but they will rise again." A few weeks after the storm, life at the House of Wings slowly returned to rhythm. The broken trees had begun to heal, new leaves sprouting where branches had snapped. The birds sang again, softer at first, then brighter each day. But Eli still carried the weight of that night in his heart. One afternoon, as he was fixing a perch near the garden, he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned, a young woman stood by the gate. She was holding a cardboard box close to her chest, her hair messy from the wind. "Are you Eli?" she asked. He nodded, brushing the dirt from his hands. "That's me. How can I help you?" She opened the box slightly. Inside was a small, trembling pigeon. Its wing bent awkwardly, feathers ruffled from exhaustion. "I found it near the road," she said softly. "Someone told me you take care of birds." Eli's expression softened. "You heard right. Come in." He took the box gently from her hands and carried it to the porch. The woman followed, watching as he examined the bird carefully. "It's a clean break," he murmured. "She must have hit something hard while flying." He worked quietly, wrapping the pigeon's wing with thin strips of cloth and murmuring to it under his breath, calm, soothing words like Harold once used. "You're really good at that," the woman said, a hint of awe in her voice. Eli smiled faintly. "I had a great teacher." She looked around the cottage, the feeders, the trees filled with birds of every color. "This place is magical," he chuckled. "It's a lot of work, but yeah, I guess it is." The woman introduced herself as Clara. She was a teacher from a nearby town who loved animals and had heard about the sanctuary from one of her students. She began visiting often, bringing injured or lost birds she found on her walks. Over time, their friendship grew naturally, two gentle souls drawn together by compassion. Sometimes they would sit on the porch for hours, just talking while birds perched nearby, listening. Other times they would work side by side, cleaning cages, planting new trees, repairing nests. "You know," Clara said one evening as the sun dipped low, "you've built something incredible here. You've given them a home, and maybe given yourself one too." Eli looked at her, then at the horizon where the sky burned orange and gold. "It's not really mine," he said quietly. "It belonged to someone before me. I'm just keeping it alive for him." Clara smiled gently. "Then you're doing a beautiful job." A soft wind passed through the garden, carrying the sound of fluttering wings. And for the first time in years, Eli didn't feel alone anymore. By the next spring, the House of Wings had become more than just a cottage. It was a movement. With Clara's help, Eli began expanding the sanctuary. The small backyard that once held a few handmade shelters now stretched into a wide garden with trees, perches, and feeding corners. Wooden signs marked every section: the healing grove, the flight yard, the nesting garden. Children from nearby schools started visiting on weekends, bringing crumbs and stories. Some of them even volunteered, helping Clara clean the feeders and refill the water bowls. Their laughter mixed with birdsong, filling the air with something pure and alive. Eli watched them with quiet pride. He could almost see Harold smiling somewhere beyond the clouds. One afternoon, as Eli repaired a broken fence, Clara approached him holding a small notebook. "I've been thinking," she said, opening it to show sketches and notes. "We should build a bigger shelter, one with proper care rooms for the injured birds. Maybe even a small classroom for kids to learn about them." Eli looked at her, impressed. ambitious. Clara grinned. You taught me that wings only work if you let them stretch. He laughed. All right, let's do it. They worked for weeks, cutting wood, painting signs, planting more trees. Villagers helped too, bringing tools and food. Someone donated old windows. Another built a wooden gate with the words, "Welcome," little wings carved across the top. When the new shelter was finally finished, they held a small opening day. The townspeople gathered around, watching as Eli gently opened a wooden cage. A dozen healed birds flew out together, their wings glinting in the afternoon light. The crowd applauded. Some cried. Clara stood beside Eli, her eyes shining. You did it, she whispered. He shook his head. We did it. And Harold? He's part of this too. That night, as everyone left and the last lanterns flickered out, Eli and Clara sat on the porch in peaceful silence. Fireflies danced across the grass, and the stars shimmered faintly above. Eli looked out toward the horizon. You know, when I was a kid, I used to think Harold's house was magic, because birds never left it. But now I understand. Clara tilted her head. Understand what? He smiled softly. It wasn't the house. It was the love inside it. She didn't answer. She just rested her head gently on his shoulder. The night air was warm and still. The birds were asleep. But above the quiet, the wind carried a familiar sound, like laughter, soft and distant, almost as if the sky itself was whispering. Well done, my boy. It started with a photograph. A traveler passing through town took a picture of the House of Wings, the blue cottage surrounded by hundreds of birds, mid-flight, and posted it online. Within days, the photo spread everywhere. People called it the place where birds never fear humans. Suddenly, Eli and Clara found themselves at the center of attention. Reporters came from nearby cities. Visitors poured in, eager to see the man who could talk to birds. Donations arrived, too, envelopes filled with money, letters of admiration, and even boxes of seeds mailed from faraway places. At first, it felt like a blessing. With the extra help, they built larger aviaries, hired volunteers, and even printed a small booklet about bird care that Clara had written. But with the attention came something else: noise, crowds, and pressure. Some visitors treated the sanctuary like a zoo. They took photos too close, scared the birds, left trash behind. Eli tried to stay patient, but every careless act chipped away at his calm. One afternoon, as he tried to rescue a frightened sparrow trapped between cages, a loud group of tourists surrounded him. Cameras flashed. Someone asked loudly, "Can you make it sit on your hand again?" "Do it for the video!" Eli turned sharply, his voice shaking. "They're not tricks. They're living beings, not toys for your phones." The crowd fell silent. Clara stepped in gently, guiding them away, but she could see the frustration in Eli's eyes. That evening, as the sun set and the sanctuary finally grew quiet, Eli sat on the porch, rubbing his tired hands. Clara brought him tea and sat beside him. "You're angry," she said softly. He sighed. "I didn't build this place to be famous. I built it for them, for Harold. But it feels like everyone's forgotten what it means." Clara looked at him with kind eyes. "Then remind them. You can't stop people from coming, Eli, but you can teach them why this place exists." He stared at the horizon for a moment, the orange light fading into dusk. "Teach them," he repeated. Maybe that's what Harold wanted all along, for the lesson to spread. The next morning, Eli made a decision. He closed the sanctuary for 2 days. When it reopened, there were new signs everywhere. Quiet voices only. Respect the sky. It belongs to everyone. No cages, no noise, only care. Visitors were still welcome, but they had to listen, really listen, to what the House of Wings stood for. And as the days went by, something changed. The crowds grew gentler. The laughter became softer, and the birds, once restless, began to sing freely again. Eli smiled. "That's better," he murmured to himself, watching a dove land on his hand. And for the first time since the fame began, the sanctuary felt like home again. Autumn returned with golden leaves and cooler winds. The sanctuary shimmered in the soft light, every corner alive, every tree filled with wings. To anyone passing by, the House of Wings looked perfect. But inside, something had begun to shift. Clara had been quieter lately. She still smiled, still worked with the children and cared for the birds. But her laughter, the one that used to fill the porch, came less often. Eli noticed. One evening, as the sky turned pink, he found her sitting by the old oak where Harold's first birdhouse still hung. "You've been distant," he said gently. "What's going on?" Clara hesitated, brushing her hair behind her ear. "There's something I haven't told you," she began. "My school offered me a position to lead a wildlife education program in the city. It's a big opportunity. Eli froze, his chest tightening. In the city? That's hours away. She nodded. I wasn't sure how to tell you. I love it here, Eli. You know I do. But this job, it could help more people understand what you've built here. What Harold started. He looked away, staring at the birds perched in the golden light. So you're leaving. Clara reached for his hand. Not forever, just for a while. I'll come back, and I'll keep spreading the message. Freedom, compassion, care. The same lessons you taught me. Eli tried to smile, but it faltered. It's just, this place won't be the same without you. She squeezed his hand gently. It wasn't the same without Harold either. But you kept it alive, didn't you? He nodded slowly. The next week came too fast. The morning she was set to leave, the birds gathered unusually early, filling the trees as if they, too, wanted to say goodbye. Clara stood by the gate, suitcase in hand. Eli handed her a small wooden charm, a bird carved from oak. Harold made this when I was a kid, he said softly. Keep it with you. She smiled, tears in her eyes. Then it'll be like I'm taking both of you with me. As she walked down the dusty road, the wind picked up. The birds above began to fly, circling once over her before soaring into the open sky. Eli watched until she disappeared beyond the hill. That night the sanctuary felt too big, too quiet. The stars seemed dimmer, and even the birds slept silently. Eli sat on the porch, Harold's old letter open on his lap. Don't let them be trapped here. Let them be free. He looked up, eyes glistening. You were right again, old man, he whispered. Even people have wings. And with that, he leaned back and listened to the soft rustle of feathers in the dark. A lullaby for the lonely and the brave. Winter came quietly. The mornings were pale and still, the air thin with frost. Eli moved slower these days, his steps heavier, his breath shorter. Yet every morning, he still opened the gates to the House of Wings. Without Clara, the sanctuary was peaceful but lonely. He talked less, smiled less, but he still cared for every bird as if it were his own child. The doves, the owls, the sparrows, they seemed to sense his weariness. They stayed closer now, perching near him as he worked, watching him with curious, gentle eyes. Then one evening, as Eli cleaned the cages, a letter arrived. It was from Clara. Eli, the city is louder than I remembered, but your voice echoes here. Every time I teach the children about the birds, I tell them about you, the man who listened instead of talking, who taught the sky to trust again. I'll be home soon. Eli smiled weakly, folding the letter with care. But that night, as he climbed the stairs, he felt a deep ache in his chest. He sat by the window, looking out at the moonlit sanctuary. The birds were sleeping peacefully. Harold, Clara, I think I did it, he whispered, his voice barely a breath. They're free now. They all are. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closing slowly, calm, at peace. When dawn came, the sky broke open with light. The birds began to sing louder than ever before. They filled the air with music, circling the cottage in great sweeping arcs, as if announcing something sacred. When Clara arrived a few days later, she found Eli sitting by the window, still and smiling faintly, the old letter from Harold resting on his lap. The sanctuary was silent except for the steady, rhythmic beating of wings outside. She didn't cry at first. She just walked out into the open field, where hundreds of birds were gathered, their wings glimmering in the morning sun. Slowly she opened the gates wide, wider than ever before, and whispered, "Fly, my friends. Fly for him." The birds lifted all at once, a storm of color and light. They soared higher and higher until they became one with the sky. Months later, Clara rebuilt the sanctuary, not as the House of Wings, but as Eli's sky. It became a place for healing, for freedom, for remembering the people who listened to the wind and taught others to do the same. Children came from all over, planting trees and learning how to care for the smallest creatures. And every evening, when the sun set over the golden fields, a white dove always returned, landing on the window where Eli once sat, as if to say, "I'm still here." And somewhere beyond the clouds, perhaps Eli was, smiling, as the sky filled once more with wings.